We can get down to a little more practical things, a little more details. So stay tuned. It's coming right back.
So I would like to change the format a little bit. I like dialogue much better than monologue, and just from the few people that I've talked to, I know that all of you have a lot of important things to offer. And so I want to just make a few introductory comments, and then I notice there's a microphone in the middle of the room there. And if all of you who want to be a part of this conversation would take a minute to kind of move more toward the center so we can be more together. And then I would like to invite everybody that's here to make their own contributions. I mean, I'm particularly, do any of you do holistic resource management? All right, okay. I would really like to hear from you because I haven't practiced that. I have spent some time with Avery and I know a little bit about it, but I would really like to hear the experience of those of you who are doing this on the ground. And the same thing is true of biodynamics. Now, I am a certified biodynamic farmer, so I can talk about that experience a bit. We would also like to hear more about, especially those of you who are practicing biodynamics here in Canada. So I think it's really always important for us to get, academic knowledge is one thing, experience-based knowledge is another, and sharing that kind of knowledge and information, I think, is really important. So does that work? Does anybody want me to just lecture for an hour and a half? Okay, so let me by way of a couple of introductory comments that I want to make. As you probably know, I didn't say a lot in my talk this morning about, praising organic. And it's not because I don't think that organic has a contribution to make, but I think we have to be very careful about allowing ourselves to get locked into one particular approach to solving these challenges that I mentioned this morning, like as though that's the answer to everything. I think organic has a major contribution to make, but it doesn't have the answer to everything. Neither does biodynamics, neither does holistic resource management. But they all have developed an approach which begins to move us in the right direction. We need to learn from that. And then we're going to have to continue to apply and modify those principles as we move into the future. And here's something that I didn't get a chance to talk about this morning, about the concept of resilience. And, to me, one of the really important things about the resources that are out there now is that we have two professional societies now that have emerged that I think are providing us with some really important insights for how we approach all of these. And one is the Resilience Alliance. This is a group of resilience thinkers who originally emerged out of Australia, and they're national now. And you can just Google the Resilience Alliance. Most of the stuff that they've written is available for free. But they are making a major contribution, and I think that one of the things that, and also those of you who are not interested or not acquainted with all of this literature, there is a single volume by Walker and Salt, who are two of the resilience thinkers, who published a book in Island Press, I think 2006 if I remember right, called Resilience Thinking. And it's one of the best comprehensive descriptions of what resilience thinking is about. But here's the key thing, it's really the core of it. What resilience and the resilience thinkers are telling us now is that it doesn't make any difference whether you're dealing with natural capital or with social capital or with economic capital, any one of those systems. That none of those systems are static. So that if you think that the way in which the world works now is sort of stable and this is what we can depend on that's reliable, that's not the way systems work. If you're a business person, your company's not going to work that way. If you're a farmer, your farm's not going to work that way. If you're a school teacher, your school systems are not going to work that way. In other words, all of these systems, social, ecological, economic, they all go through a series of changes. And those changes are what they call adaptive cycles. And there's basically four components to those natural cycles. So you start out at the beginning of that cycle, usually there's some kind of innovation which causes some new thinking and new ways of doing things, etc. And then out of that innovation you have a kind of sorting out process of what works and what doesn't work. And then eventually you come to a conservation phase, which is the kind of stable phase. Now if you think about this in terms of our larger industrial economy, the innovation phase was stimulated primarily by the discovery of fossil fuels. It was coal, and then oil, and natural gas. This was what stimulated all of the innovation about the new way of doing business, about the new way of farming, about the new way of doing everything. And that then became the industrial economy, which was the conservation phase. And then you have a third approach which happens, which is, some kind of disturbance which comes into the picture. And that's where we're at right now with the industrial economy and with our industrial agriculture. And so I talked about that a little bit this morning. I won't go into detail on it now. So we're now reaching this point where that's not going to work anymore. But this creates also a period of time then for innovation, for experimentation, for new ways of thinking about things. And then out of that comes a new period of innovation and a new conservation. And you go through the whole process again. Now the reason I think it's so important for us to think about life and to think about whatever it is that we do, whether it's running a business or a farm or anything else in those terms, because it then doesn't allow you as easily to fall into this trap of saying, well, we know organic agriculture works, so if we just all become organic, everything will be fine. And that's not, it's not the way systems work. So we need to learn from organic and what there is about organic that contributes, to the new direction that we need to move in agriculture. And the same thing is true of biodynamics. The same thing is true of holistic resource management. So, so to me, one of the really important things that I think, and there are resources which are available to us now, is that one of the things that is important in all of this is that you always have some wisdom from the past, which we can take into our thinking as we go through these processes. And this is particularly important now in terms of agriculture. We've had people throughout our history of the evolution of industrial agriculture that had reservations about moving in this direction. You had people like Sir Robert Howard, who wrote an Agricultural Testament, and then later The Soil and Health. And there's an incredible amount of wisdom that he has. Now that's not the mistake we would make is to try to go back to do what Sir Robert Howard did, because we live in a different kind of world now. But the wisdom that he had about how nature functioned, he in his Agricultural Testament, his basic idea was that instead of developing these systems of agriculture that are dependent on all of these resources that I talked about this morning, we ought to do agriculture as a mimic of nature. Let's see how nature does things, and then let's do agriculture in that same way. Now, what he had available to him in terms of how nature functioned to create an agriculture that mimicked nature, back in his time in the early 1900s, we've gone way beyond that. We've got a whole lot of other things that are available to us. The same thing is true of Rudolf Steiner. I think that one of the most important things that Rudolf Steiner ever said in his writings was that we always have to pay attention to the inner workings of nature. Now, I think, unfortunately, to some extent, the biodynamic movement has become, again, a kind of ideological system that would say, well, if everybody just uses the preparations and everybody does these kinds of things, we'll be fine. That's not the way Steiner, not the way his mind worked. He, in fact, said at one point that the preparations weren't going to do you much good if you didn't have a system put together that paid attention to the inner workings of nature in terms of how the system operates, and then the preparations were simply an enhancement of that system that you put together. And if you didn't put the system together, the preparations essentially were not going to be effective. So, so again, if we go back to this wisdom from the past and learn how to approach things, And then at our moment in history, what we need to do, it seems to me, is to marry that wisdom with the science of ecology and evolutionary biology. And in our agriculture and food systems, we've done almost none of that. All of the incredible research that our ecologists and evolutionary biologists have done is essentially sitting on a shelf. And if any of you have ever attended any of the professional societies, the Ecological Society of America, for example, there are actually more researchers in the field of ecology who are interested in doing research in agriculture than there are people in the field of agriculture doing research on, to see how the science of ecology and evolutionary biology applies to our agricultural food system. So there's an enormous amount of possibility here of really coming up with some new ways of thinking, and I think we have to constantly remain open and not simply allow ourselves to get locked into one kind of system. And let me just give you one other resource that I think is really important here, and it's a simple essay that Wendell Berry wrote already back in it was originally published in the Rodale Institute's journal, and then it was republished in his book, what was the name of the book? I'm slipping my mind out. Anyway, the title of the essay is Solving for Pattern, and it's the 9th chapter of this book that he published in 1981. And again, if you want to read this, it's very easy. Just Google Solving for Pattern, Wendell Berry, and it comes up. You can copy it off for free. But it's a very short essay, and basically what Wendell was arguing in this very short, powerful piece is that in our culture, we always tend to try to solve things in terms of a specific problem and try to address that specific problem. And that never gets us to any kind of real solutions, because that problem is always part of a much larger pattern, a much larger, interrelationship of things. And so you don't solve the issue that way. So what we need to do is to think about all of the issues that we're dealing with, to think about them in terms of patterns and how all of those patterns are connected, and then how you solve the pattern. And this is why, to me, it would be a mistake for us to simply say, well, it's holistic resource management, or it's biodynamic, or it's agriculture, or it's whatever else. That's the solution to the problem, because it's not going to move us in the right direction. You have to solve for pattern. So we learn from all of these things. So it seems to me that borrowing from the wisdom from the past and then applying that wisdom to the science of ecology and evolutionary biology, and then we have to think really creatively together. And it's especially important, and I tried to make this point this morning, I think, to do that as communities of people. And here's another thing that's kind of interesting right now, is that there's another kind of body of literature that's emerging that's entitled Collective Impact. And it's been, and again, you can just Google Collective Impact and the information comes up. There's especially 2 essays that have been published around that. But this is, there are now funding groups like foundations that are now moving in the direction of no longer funding individual projects, because again, it's not solving the problem. So what they're encouraging is for people and communities to get together, or different kinds of organizations getting together, figuring out how to work together to have a collective impact, because it's the collective impact that's going to begin to solve our problem. So these are all, in my view, positive things that are happening that are not in the public media. They're just sort of happening out there, but they're available, really to all of us. And one of the great advantages of Google is that you can get that information pretty easily just by, typing in those descriptions, and the information comes up. And if any of you want to access that information and you have difficulty finding it, you don't, just send me an email and I'll be happy to get it to you.